All right, let's get started. So, I do read the comments. I do check to see what you're saying to me. And what I kind of got out of this, I responded to a lot of them, but I think there's a misconception on either what I was saying or what SteamOS is, or what the Steam Deck is. I'm gonna have to rehash a lot of stuff that I've said in other videos because a lot of this all kind of culminates into this, you know. But basically, I wanted to go into distros. Just because they are based on something does not mean they are the same thing. So, for example, people say, well, uh, SteamOS is Arch based, so it's a rolling release, and that's only kind of true because since SteamOS is immutable, you don't actually use the Arch repositories. What you do instead is you get a system image and you update the entire system image. Now, I haven't actually used SteamOS, but from what I understand from immutable distros, that's how it works. And I've had to look up like how you do things on SteamOS because another thing people mentioned was, oh well, I could use it on the desktop, as it is right now. And I'm like, maybe, but you probably have a NVIDIA graphics card, and if you have a NVIDIA graphics card, you may be out of luck for right now. Because again, it's immutable. You're not able to install the NVIDIA drivers on top of it. But the other thing too is SteamOS. Like, I mean, when I mentioned Bazite, it's because Bazite does a lot of shit that SteamOS would need to do in order to be usable on the desktop. And Bazite, I don't want to say it's more geared towards developers, but Aurora, the distro, it's kind of basically, it's not technically a fork, but they have like a lot. It's basically Aurora, which is KDE UBlue, but with Steam's like GameScope. And that was another thing I saw always people said GameScope only works on or is only optimized for SteamOS, and that's only kind of true because there is a NixFlake for it. So if you are crazy enough to run NixOS, you could do it, but you can also run it on Bazite. And the thing that concerns me is on Bazite, I ended up using the terminal a lot. And what has happened is people were saying, oh, well, if Valve makes it, I won't ever use the terminal and it'll be just like Windows. And I'm like, no, it won't. Because you may be able to escape the terminal if all you do is play Steam games on your Steam Deck, or maybe if you install Lutris or something. But there's no way you're going to escape the terminal if you use it on a desktop. There's just no way in hell. You are going to have to eventually pick up a terminal and use it. And there's a plethora of reasons for this. So one thing Linus did on his video was he decided to print something from the Steam Deck, and I don't think it had cups enabled. I don't know why it wouldn't have cups enabled because maybe you want to print something off it, but it's a gaming distro, so why the fuck would it need a printer? Why the fuck would it need printer support? But I don't know if they've patched that or if that was something else or if it just didn't have his driver, because that's another thing Bazite does and UBlue does, right? Is when you need a printer driver. So for me, I have a Brother HLL 2300D, which is an older Brother printer. That's why I got it at such a good price, and that's why I got my toner at such a good price. But basically, I need the HLL BR laser driver, or no, I need, yeah, BR laser, which is for legacy Brother printers. It's like a, I don't even know what it is anymore, but it's basically the way how the open source people have added support for that printer and cups. So I have to install that on any distro I run, and Bazite did not have that driver pre-installed, but I was able to install it with RPM OS tree, which is basically adding a package onto your system image, and it's kind of reserved for things like VPN clients or whatever that just can't be installed through any other means, And so on SteamOS, because it's immutable, how the fuck are you gonna do that? you know, because that's kind of the thing about desktops versus gaming, and that's why I think that Valve would do a lot better making a Steam machine too that does not replace your desktop, but instead acts as a second computer. Because I mean, obviously Linux isn't really a suitable drop-in replacement for Windows in the first place. But when you get into a desktop use case, there's like a million different configurations you gotta handle, and that's why I don't think people realize this, but Valve is not a magical company. It's not like they're right, like they made a device and they made gaming really easy to do on Linux. But just because they made gaming easy to do, even though Wine was already heavily in development and Proton is basically Wine with some patches and other stuff that Valve has done. It's made it a lot easier, don't get me wrong. But we already kind of had Wine, and this is just better Wine basically. The problem is when you get into desktops, because there's no way to escape the terminal, because you're going to have to deal with all these different configurations, multi-monitor setups, multiple hard drives, mixers, DACs, amps, whatever the fuck else, webcams, printers. I got a fucking 3D printer hooked up to my computer. So like there's so much shit you got to be able to do. Capture cards, that's another thing. And a lot of the stuff does work out of the box with Linux. A lot of my stuff works out of the box just fine. But gamers, they have a lot of proprietary shit, and when you have a lot of proprietary shit, like maybe a Logitech mouse or you got a Razer or RGB or something, there's a lot of shit you got to set up, to get that stuff working right, to get that stuff working the same as it did on Windows, and you got to use alternatives to get this working, and a lot of the Windows software isn't the same, and unless you're like managing your music library on the Steam Deck or something, you're gonna need a program for that. You're gonna need to mess with shit. You're probably going to need the terminal to do a lot of these things, whether it be Xrandr or setting up drivers or DistroBox. That's another thing, because on Bazzite I had to use DistroBox, and the way how I figured out I had to use DistroBox was I tried to run an app image and it said, "Oh, you're missing libgtk 4.0," because I was on KDE and not GNOME. GNOME. But but basically, and then as soon as I decided to use DistroBox, guess what DistroBox is? Even though I had BoxBuddy, I had to type commands into the terminal. I had to know my file system. You still have to know Linux in order to use this on the desktop. And I don't want to. I'm basically not sugarcoating it. I know a lot of people will say that I'm being like an elitist or something, but no, that's the shit I gotta do. Even if I don't want to, even if I don't want to fuck around with shit, I have to, because there's so much shit that you have to do on Linux to get it to work, and a lot of it's going to involve terminal, a lot of it's going to involve messing around with shit. You may even have to replace some of your peripherals. Like when we get into desktop Linux, it's going to be a very different beast from a device that was designed to have Linux run on it. You know what I mean? And that's why I think that would be a great idea for SteamOS, or for a Steam machine, is because if people aren't replacing their entire life with a Steam machine, and using it as their like main desktop, I think it will work fine. It will work fine as a gaming console, because all it has to do is play games. And what we're not going to get, though, is Valve isn't going to make Linux any easier to use on the desktop. If Bazzite could have done it, they would have done it. You know what I mean? Like there's no way around it. You're going to have to deal with things when you switch over to Linux, and obviously you have to deal with things on Windows too. But we don't have to get into that. So, anyways, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. Is there's I think it's a huge misconception that people think that Valve is going to save Linux on the desktop. Cause it would have happened. Somebody would have done it if it could be that easy to use, but it isn't. you know, like at the end of the day, we're still in an open source mentality. So things are going to work differently from proprietary software, and with proprietary hardware as well, we got to deal with that too. And a lot of it's going to involve some tinkering. That's just what's going to happen. So I don't know. I don't see this as a way out, and this is kind of a follow up to saying, why do you want SteamOS on the desktop? What does it give you? The answer is I don't. I think as soon as Valve releases SteamOS on the desktop, people are going to realize that it's just another fucking Linux distro, and it's not really all that different from anything else. It's not going to make it any easier to use, like, compared to like Mint or something or Pop OS or whatever. It's going to be the same, the same amount of usability. It's just it'll be made by Valve, you know, and maybe it'll focus on gaming. That's probably what's going to happen. So, it would work great on a console. I don't see I don't see people replacing their Windows desktops with SteamOS though. Even though they say they want to, I don't see that as the future, because they would have just installed the Linux distro if they actually gave a shit. You know what I mean? It's not going to be any easier. The SteamOS will not save you. So I don't know. That's about it. Thanks.